Marie watched the screen where Drake was talking. You don't need that, right? Because Marie is your POV character, so nobody else can be watching the screen. So Drake spoke from the screen, or on the screen, or however you want to phrase it.
Yeah, I always say
Um,
take it to the diagramming and
yeah.
sentence structure is all about controlling what the reader looks at. So if I write, Marie watched as Drake came at her with a knife, now
Mm,
I'm looking at Marie as she's looking at something, in this case, probably terrifying.
yes.
Um, as opposed to just, Drake came at Marie with the knife.
Yes.
Now, and so if we diagram those in the first way, the subject is Marie and the action is watched. But that's
Mm.
not the action of the sentence. Not really, not the one we want the reader's focus on. Drake, charged Marie with a knife. Now the subject is Drake and the action is charged. And that is such a stronger image to allow the reader to see. Releasing your inner dragon. Would you like to
So
start?
I feel like this is one of those questions that could be asked without using words like I feel. Maybe one can go a little more potent on the question. What do you think? How would you phrase the question?
I don't write out of my mouth, putting me on the spot.
And that was an example of a much stronger verb that at least creates an image of not writing out of your mouth.
Right. Well, this is why, we start there. This is why I always say you can't write the way you talk, because we
Yeah.
talk very simply, we talk very passively, we talk very redundantly. We use a lot of adverbs and just crappy ways of talking because that's just how we communicate. That is good person to person communication. Plus, we rely on body language and facial expressions and inflections. And in prose, you don't get any of that. And that's why I always say you can't write the way you talk because it will read weak.
Yeah. And one of the ways in which you can massively and dramatically improve the strength of your writing is by choosing the correct verbs. Not necessarily the strongest verb, but the correct verb for the image that you want to paint. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is how to use your verbs correctly to paint a good image in the reader's mind.
And I think that's the fundamental argument that a lot of people have. Um, some people, not many, but a few people read my stuff and go, oh, you're way too descriptive. You don't leave anything to the reader's imagination. You don't do anything for them. When I write, because I did have this discussion with a fan years ago, and they were like, I love your storytelling, but you're way too detailed. I wish you would be less detailed. When I'm writing, I don't give any detail to my fans. He also didn't use punctuation or capitalization. So when he says he gives nothing to the fans or to the readers of his stuff, he literally means nothing, And so,
So so he was obviously down a weird path, but I
yeah,
have heard and I have seen successful authors who are less descriptive, who do write minimalist.
yeah,
And that is 100% a valid style choice. There's nothing wrong.
especially depending on the genre.
Yeah.
A murder mystery is about the murder mystery. It's
Yeah.
not about the details of the world and the
Mm,
culture and everything like that, like it is for us in epic fantasy.
yeah. And it's also a case, like as you says, like some writers do want to leave more to the imagination of the reader, do want to give the reader some scope of imagination, whatever, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But no matter if you are a descriptive writer or not, you still, and in fact, it's even more important for minimalist writers, you have to choose the right verbs. The verb is the center point of your sentence. It's the part of your sentence that's literally doing the work. it creates the strongest image in your reader's mind. If I say, I punch the screen versus I touch the screen, these evoke two very different images, and the only thing that changes is the verb. So, why can one have verbs that are too strong?
Because it doesn't paint the image that we're trying to paint. So if, I say, if I'm trying to show you that the car next to me bumped into me, and I wrote, the car next to me slammed into me, like that's going to paint a very violent collision, which is where you might have somebody write some, add those crappy ly adverbs to, the car gently
Slammed
slammed
lightly.
into me. You have these weird images that are created in the reader's mind.
Dumbledore shouted calmly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, the verbs are definitely can definitely be too strong. And if you find yourself following a verb with a adverb that is meant to soften the verb, you've made the verb too strong. You
Or if
need
you're
to
using an adverb to strengthen a verb, you've made the verb too weak.
exactly. Yeah. So
You know,
which is the other way around. That's
yeah,
if like, you know, I thrust my fist forward heavily,
right,
to give the reverse of it. Yeah.
right.
And it's basically the intent is either to strengthen the verb or to weaken the verb. And either way, you've used the wrong verb.
Yeah, and that's one of the three. There's 3 points that I always teach for ly adverbs. It's not, I'm not against ly adverbs. There's always a place for them. I think it's silly to say cut them all out, but there are 3 ways that you should never use an ly adverb, and one of them is because you
Yeah.
use the wrong verb. So you're using an ly adverb to strengthen the fact that you chose a weak verb, or you're using an ly adverb to lessen because you chose a too strong of a verb. And so yeah,
100%.
that's just dumb. You're just adding a word for no reason.
Just apropos the discussion about descriptors, the Peanut Gallery put a great chat in there where they said that Jane Austen never really describes locations of people physically, but always describes the personality or how they hold themselves, which is true. You very rarely get an actual physical description of the person. You get their personality and what they look like and the feelings the place evokes, which is probably why she's still popular, 200 years later, because she connects on a very emotional level with a reader rather than on a physical one. Like, I know what her locations feel like. The same with the Bronte sisters, actually thinking about them now. I know what those locations, I know what Wuthering Heights feel like. I know what these locations feel like, even if I can't describe them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the way I try to write. I've told this story before about when in the second book of the Genesis saga, when the decision was made to put the characters on the main cover, and the artist was like, "Hey, I don't have time to reread book one. Can you go through and send me where you describe the main characters?" And I was like, I didn't describe the main characters. And he was like, "Yeah, you did. I know exactly what they look like." I'm like, "Yeah, you know exactly what they look like, but I never described them." Like,
Mm.
that's all on you. And it's the way you describe them in a way that the person can kind of visualize what they feel is the best for them for that character. And
Yeah.
so I do I do like that much better than
Mm.
now. I do like to give 1 or 2 details. You know, Alith has silver eyes and white
Yeah.
hair. Like, I do like those few little details to help paint. But for the most part, I don't go into, how
Yeah.
plump her lips are, or the shape of her nose, or are her ears
In other
high or
words,
low?
your books won't be quoted on men writing women subreddit.
Yeah, no, 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 no.
That is a subreddit you should only visit if you want to see true horror, because
Did,
there are
didn't know that
there
sub.
are some descriptions.
Yeah, didn't even know that subreddit existed. No, I mean, if it's important to the story, I bring it in, but it's because it's important to that moment or whatever. I mean,
Yeah.
like in her opening chapter, there's some guys that are manhandling her and basically treating her as an object, and so there is some references to, you know, different body parts, but I don't describe a woman by their body parts. Like I don't. The woman walked in, her, I don't even know how to do it. Her voluptuous hips sway. Like I don't even know how to write something like that.
Mm,
So yeah, I don't describe people by their body parts. Um,
yeah. But yeah, so verbs are a very central part of all of that description, all of the discussion we've had up to now. Um, do you have, like, besides words that are besides ly adverbs, do you have any other like signs of a weak verb that you want to highlight?
yeah, I mean the big thing that most people fail on is when they're using a verb that's too weak is because they're using a verb that doesn't actually paint anything.
Mm,
So, I handed the ticket to the person behind the counter. Like it doesn't really paint any picture. You don't see any actual motion or anything like that, as opposed to if you did something like, I thrust the
mm,
ticket at the person behind the counter. That gives a sense of anger or frustration or whatever. So just handing doesn't add anything. It gives the motion, but doesn't give it any emotion.
mm.
Um, I walked into the room versus I
I
stumbled into the room,
strode.
or
Yeah.
I strode into the room, or I whatever. So one of the things
I
that verbs
crept,
for
I
me,
snuck into the room.
right, exactly. So what I'm looking for verbs to do is to do more than just paint the visual of the scene, this sentence that I'm doing. I want it
Yeah.
to add something more. I want it to actually give to the
Yes.
story.
But now that being said, it is entirely possible to go overboard
Mm,
and to use really weird verbs that have no actual purpose in being in a sentence. And the kind of the picture they paint can end up strange.
yeah, there's so in my show don't tell class when I'm talking about verbs, I start off with Drake hit the wall. I'm like everybody
Mm,
can see that. But if I wrote Drake bashed the wall, bashed brings with it something that hit doesn't.
yeah.
Or Drake slapped the wall, or Drake, you know, whatever. But the last one I write, which is technically correct, Drake percussed the wall. And it's just like, unless the wall is a big gigantic drum, it's a weird way of saying that. So our producer Monique, who's always given us things to watch before these things, just kind of help think about things. One of the videos that she did send to us about this was a girl talking about verbs, and she said, well, I have this one that I just wrote and I really like it, and I know it's weird, but I really like it. And it was the snow griddled in the sunlight. And I'm like, I don't even know what I'm supposed to paint with that verb. So it's just weird. Although she did have one that was really nice because she was talking about an exercise that she was doing that her teacher made her do. And the she was talking about common combinations like, snow falls,
Yeah.
leaves rustle. We're used to these pairings of things. And so the teacher was doing this exercise, and one of them was guillotine. And we always get like guillotine slices or guillotine whatever. And she said one of the students came up with the guillotine widowed the head. And I'm like, see, now that's actually poetic
Mm,
and kind of really cool. And she was saying the same thing. But
yeah.
so there you can use some unique verbs, or in this case a noun that you're verbing or whatever, and that's
Yeah.
actually really cool because it does paint this poetic picture. I don't know what to picture in my head when the snow griddles in the sunlight. I
I
honestly,
guess it's supposed to be kind of like a barbecue, but I don't know. That doesn't seem quite. I don't know. I've seen a lot of snow, and I've seen a lot of snow and sunlight, and I'm not
Right.
quite reaching the picture, I
Right.
think.
But even if you wanted to go that something like sizzled or
Yeah,
something like that, if you want to give it the baking kind of thing, griddled just doesn't. I don't know. That was a very odd choice for me.
yeah,
Again, I'm not saying she's wrong.
yeah.
She has the ability to do whatever she wants to do in her writing. But those are the things that, so to me,
I think one other thing that we do just need to touch on is that you can, in fact, turn a noun into a verb in English. You always can. This is a
even proper
perfectly
nouns.
acceptable thing. But make sure you understand what picture is going to be painted in that use of the noun.
When I'm talking about people who write really shallow themes, I say you've Michael Bay'd your theme.
Yes.
Um, and everyone who's seen a Michael Bay movie gets that, oh, yeah, no, it's just a movie with big explosions and no depth whatsoever. So I have verbed even a proper noun. I mean, that is a beautiful thing about that.
Yeah.
But so to me, what I was going to say earlier, a lot of this stuff comes, how I see it is just like a typo. If I have a sentence as a typo in it where it has a word that doesn't mean what you think it means or whatever, or is misspelled, or is
Mm.
missing a word, or it's just a poorly constructed sentence. So it's the information is there, but you might have, you know, a dangling participle or whatever, and those things become confusing to read. Those pull a reader out of the story. Doing something like the snow griddled under the sun also pulls the reader out of the story and not in a good way. And so that's the same thing. So even though you might go, oh, well, that's a clever way of thinking about that, it's still a clever way that's going to pop me out of the story. And I'm no longer watching the movie because I'm like, okay, that's weird. That's a weird way to say that. It's a weird way to do whatever. And so I feel the same way about that. If you had something like the guillotine widowed the Baron's head off, you're not going to be popped out of the story as much as the first example. And so that's the thing that I do caution about trying to get tricky with your verbs. If they bring an emotion that isn't there, or the other side of it, my other answer to your question of what else do you look for is cutting out ambiguity. So Drake realized what he said was dumb. So realized I can't paint that. You know, that's something that is this vague statement that I don't know what I'm going to see something, but it's not going to be what you necessarily want me to see. It might be
Mm.
something different. And so, if you write Drake's side shaking his head in remorse over what he just said or something like that. So now
Yeah.
you're showing me what it means for Drake to realize that what he said was dumb.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing that I'm looking for, those vague words, the suddenlies, the realize, the news, the all of that. Sometimes they have their
Yes.
place. And again, I'm never saying cut all of them or anything like that, but it's definitely not a
Yeah.
great choice normally.
When your filter words are doing the majority of the heavy lifting in the sentence, you're probably using the wrong verb.
Well, let's go down filtering because filtering
Yeah.
is a verb that becomes your
Yeah.
action. So why don't you go down that?
Okay, so filtering is basically when you have additional pieces in the prose that you don't need, right? For example, Marie watched the screen where Drake was talking. You don't need that, right? Because Marie is your POV character, so nobody else can be watching the screen. So Drake spoke from the screen, or on the screen, or however you want to phrase it.
Yeah, I always say
Um,
take it to the diagramming and
yeah,
what sentence structure is all about controlling what the reader looks at. So if I write Marie watched as Drake came at her with a knife, now I'm
mm,
looking at Marie as she's looking at something, in this case probably terrifying,
yes,
um as opposed to just Drake came at Marie with the knife.
Yes.
Now, and so if we diagram those in the first way, the subject is Marie and the action is watched. But that's
Mm.
not the action of the sentence. Not really, not the one we want the reader's focus on. Drake, charged Marie with a knife. Now the subject is Drake and the action is charged. And that is such a stronger image to allow the reader to see. And then, yeah, as long as you've done your job and as long as you're writing in a limited POV, then we know who the POV is. So, therefore, everything that is seen, heard, smelled, touched, felt, experienced is being experienced by that POV. And this really comes down to a lack of confidence both in themselves as writers, because they're like, oh, if I don't say Marie watched Drake do it, then how will they ever know that it was Marie who was watching? I don't know, because you did a good job in setting up the POV and everything that's seen is said, seen by Marie. Maybe there's that. And then it's also not trusting your readers to be
Yeah.
smart enough to be able to follow this because you've done it right. So a lot of it just has to do with confidence and trust.
And I mean, I guess there are like, if you say you write an omniscient or something like that, then maybe you need some filtering. But for the most part, even in omniscient, you don't really need it because you're describing from an external point of view. You know what I mean? Like you can just say Drake ran at Marie with a knife.
Right. Right. Exactly. It is the same thing.
Yeah,
My mouth's a little dry, so I'm gonna eat a
no
piece of
problem.
candy.
So I guess those to me are the big points that you need to bear in mind with verbs. You need to know that if you're using an ly verb to strengthen a verb or to weaken a verb, you're using the wrong verb. If you are using weird verbs that paint weird images, like check with a few people what image it creates in their head. Because you, the author, you know exactly what image you create. Obviously, the word reads right to you. Um, and then watch your filtering. Make sure that you're not doing lifting with a wrong thing. And then I think we do want to go through a practical example.
Yeah. Do you want to copy that into a Word document so we can share it on the
I
screen?
already have.
Oh, you're awesome. So before we go there, I do want to talk about one thing.
Yeah.
And it's one of my philosophies that both me and you share, but so many writers do not. And I do believe that this is the one thing that gets so many writers. And that writer that we just picked on about her YouTube comment,
Mm,
I always say, you as the writer do not have the ability to choose whether what you've written is good or not. It's not
mm,
your call because you're not writing for yourself. So she said, I know it's weird, but I like it. You will never hear me say that because I don't care what I like. I care how it impacts the others. And so when I write something, now, don't get me wrong, I'm not a sellout. I love everything I write. But if I love the line, the snow griddled under the sun, and then I let my beta readers read it, and 20% of them circled that and went, this threw me out of the story.
yeah.
I would go, well, I don't want a 4 out of 5 stars or a 3 out of 5 stars or a 2 out of 5 stars if more and more people were circling it. And I would go, as much as I love that, let me write something else that I love. And so it's not that I would then go, fine, and write some line that's just a piece of garbage line that I hate, because I'm not going to
Mm,
put my name on something that I think is a piece of garbage that I hate. So I'm going to go back to the, imagination well, and I'm going to come up with another way to describe it that I still love. And then I'm going to get that out to them because I don't get to decide if I like something. That's not my decision. And so then it's going to go out to them. So now it's a second thing that I love, maybe love more than the original line. And then the beta readers go like, ooh, like this fix. I really like this. This works really well for me. And I go, bingo. Now it is subjective. You're never going to get 100%. But, I've actually pared my beta team down to closer to 40. It's a lot of work having 100 beta readers. So this next round of this next novel, I pared it down to just under 4. I think it's 39. But still, if one or two of them is like, this doesn't work for me, or it almost works for me, or I think you should change it to here, whatever. But the rest of them are like, this is awesome. Then that gives me a 4.7, 4.8 out of 5 stars. I'm good with that. Because you're never gonna meet, because if I fix that to fix those one or two people, then one or two other people are gonna be thrown off, or maybe even more. And so again, it's not about batting 1,000 because you can't. It is about getting to the point where you have the vast majority. As long as it's over, really 80% would be your minimum, because that's 4 out of 5 stars. But really, I try to hit over 90% of the people are satisfied with what I'm doing, or I'll just keep working on it. And it's just time and effort. And so, I'm the type of person that just doesn't mind rewriting something 50 times if I have to, because eventually I'm going to figure it out.
Yeah. So, yeah. Shall we hit this document?
Yes.
All right, so this is a very short piece, but it is rife with weak verbs. The man went into the room and looked around. He took a step forward and got his gun from his belt. The door made a noise as it closed behind him. He was scared, but he moved slowly toward the window. Outside, the wind was blowing softly, making the trees shake slightly. The man put his hand on the glass and felt the coldness. He was thinking about what he had to do next. Okay. How many did you spot, audience? All right,
At
let's
least
talk
one in
about
every sentence.
let's talk about these puppies.
So again, like when we get to the bottom of this, we start realizing that the image that we're trying to paint in here is one of kind of dread or concern or fear or whatever. And so a lot of that can be conveyed through subtext, through your verb choices. So, like, just to start off with, we have two of them in the first sentence. So we start with went. What if we said something instead like crept? Because crept is going to bring in with it emotions, because we're not just going into a room, we're creeping into the room, which is going to automatically convey some stuff.
How about we say this? Eyes darting around.
Yeah. Now, another thing I want to talk about with this, because there was another video that Monique sent to us where the girl kind of did an exercise like this. And I was listening to it over breakfast, and my wife was listening to me, and she was going through, and she was like, this word is weak, and we can replace it with this, and this word is weak. And she got to this one where she said, this word is weak. And me and my wife at the same time, because we were kind of editing it as she, right before she did, we both said a word, and she was like, well, this one's probably fine. Like, we can just leave this. And we were both like, no, it isn't. It's terrible. But it's because there's another Drakeism that I use to try to teach people when you're editing. Stop trying to edit what is written. Sometimes you can, like this first one. The man went into the room. The man crept into the room. We are editing what the actual thing is written. But the other thing you have to do is take a step back and try to find out what you're trying to do. And so, like with this one, if we were to just edit what's there and looked around, we might do and glanced around or and whatever, but we get locked into this sentence structure that's already written. And so, sure, and glanced around is better than and looked around. However, what Marie did was, I don't want to just edit the words as written. I want to convey something. So what am I trying to convey? I'm trying to convey a nervousness. Well, a better way than and glanced around is what Marie did here, which is eyes darting around. So she had to take a step back, stop looking at the structure that already existed, ask yourself, what am I trying to convey? What's a way to convey that? And then just rewrite it. So it's imperative that you stop trying to edit what is there and take a step back and just think, okay, I'm trying to convey that this person is nervous. Give me 10 ways to convey that. Eyes darting around. There's all sorts of things, sweat streaming down his palms, like whatever. There's all sorts of
Streaming
ways.
is maybe a bit much, but sweat dampening his palms, definitely.
Right, whatever.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, when you take a step back, when you stop trying to edit the words as written, and take a step back and going, okay, what am I trying to convey here? And then just go, okay, let me think of 5 ways to do that. And then think of them and go, oh, yeah, I like this. I like the third way that I came up with best, or I like the first way, or I like the whatever.
Yeah.
That helps you in editing so much. So exactly what you did here, don't shackle yourself to the structure of the crap sentence you wrote that you're trying to fix.
Yeah. Then he took a step forward. He took, at the very least, can be replaced with he stepped. You can literally just do this and it's already better.
Right. He stepped forward.
Stepped forward. You can probably improve on stepped with some kind of like, he snuck his foot forward or something like that.
With careful steps.
Yeah.
It's this whole, I mean, a human
Yeah.
didn't write this. I just had ChatGPT. I just told it to write me the worst, crappy, weak verbs in a scene. So it just wrote this really quickly. In all honesty, when we, with the sentence that we had before it,
Yeah.
really we can just cut the step forward because we already
Yeah.
have him creeping into the room.
We can.
So we can turn this sentence into just a more nervous way of fondling his gun,
Yeah.
or pulling it from his belt or anything else like that.
His fingers curled. Curled.
Yeah. So a lot of times when you're editing, you'll double dip because when you write weakly, you'll write a weak sentence and then you'll just naturally go, oh, I need another weak sentence to make sure that the two weak sentences together will kind of convey what I'm trying to do. And then once you strengthen one, you usually can just get rid of the other.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what we have here.
So when the door creaks behind him, he can actually draw the gun, right? So
Right.
we can say, instead of the door making noise, we can say, the door creaked behind him and he ripped.
I like whipped better, but again, we start to get very subjective here.
Yeah.
And this is the difference, when you watch me and Marie do something like this is where it's like there is no right or wrong answer. It's what the author is trying to convey. And me and Marie are different authors. We have a lot of similarities in our thinking and what we feel we should be doing as our job, but we write different because
so I'll tell you why I chose ripped, is because in my mind,
it's violent.
He's startled and it's
Right.
violent and like, maybe it's got one of those little leather clippies on the holster that just flies off.
Right. Yeah. No, that's what I said. There's no wrong way. That's why when I edited you, I was like, oh, I probably shouldn't have done that.
No, but it is valid that we see, because whipped and ripped create slightly different images in the reader's mind. Ripped is more out of control. Whipped is still in control, to me anyway.
Still in control, but also
on the edge.
So ripped to me conveys more of a violent movement, whereas whipped conveys more of a nervous movement in this case. So, again, if we're going with this nervousness subtext, this kind of creepy, I'm a little scared, that's, so again, this is how we think. We actually, when we're writing, every verb is going to convey a different emotion. And so it's what is the tone of the scene? And the tone is very important so that you stick with it. And so that, because remember, subtext means you're never saying it. So if the subtext of the scene is, I want to convey this character's nervousness and he's a little scared, so I don't have to write the words, he was scared, because I'm showing you his fear. Since I'm doing that, I want all the verbs to kind of build upon each other, because I'm not flat out saying he was scared like we had on this next line. I'm going to show his nervousness and show his scaredness, which means I got to do it a few times. everything, anytime that I can do something that kind of continues to build upon that motif, that's what I'm doing.
Yeah. So I just changed the sentence from he moved slowly toward the window to he snuck toward the window.
Because we've already
And I
used
cut
crept.
the he was scared because we don't need it in.
Right. And we've already
Yeah.
used crept in this piece, so we can't repeat the
Yeah.
crept.
Okay, then
We could
outside the
also,
wind.
now snucked is going to, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
It's going to convey the subtext, but it doesn't really give us that he's slowly moving. So
Yeah.
if we wanted, you focused on the subtext of, kind of the tension and the fear. But let's say I really know I want to show that he's really moving slowly. Well, I might write he inched toward the window,
Yeah.
to show that he's
Yeah.
actually moving slowly. So it just depends on what you're trying to do. Neither are right, neither are wrong. It's just, what am I trying to convey as the author? What do I want the reader to see? And just look at that. We just changed one word. He snuck toward the window is going to convey a nervousness, a caution, a stuff like that. But it's not necessarily having him slow to a crawl. Whereas if we write he inched toward the window, now the stress is more on the speed in which he's moving and
Yeah.
not the emotion in which he's moving. So again, choosing these verbs is this important. This is how much it makes a difference between what you're doing. And neither are right or wrong. It just depends on what me
Yeah.
as the author, what Marie as the author wants to focus on, wants the reader to focus on.
This next sentence could be an email. No, actually, it could be one sentence. Like it can be one concept. Outside the trees swayed in the light breeze.
Or, and again, this is where it comes down to sentence structure. No right, no wrong. So Marie wants the reader to focus on the trees because the subject of this sentence is trees and the action is swayed. But let's say we wanted them to focus on the wind. So outside, a light breeze wafted through the tree branches or whatever. So now the subject becomes the breeze. So again, it has nothing to do with right or wrong. It has to do with what do I, as the author, want the reader to focus on in this sentence. Because
What do you
every
want
one of
what do you
those,
want the reader to understand about what they're reading?
that's why
The
it's so
man put
important.
his
That's why it's so important to be able to diagram your sentences, because you got to be able to pull out your subject and your action, because those are the things that the reader is going to put more emphasis on than anything else.
The man put his hand on the glass and felt the coldness. Why am I going to stab you?
Again, and this is why you like all these people are like, oh, I can just use ChatGPT to write stories for me.
No,
Good
you
luck
can't.
with that, because ChatGPT can't write.
Yeah.
Well, we could start off. I mean, sentence structure is so awesome. So we have the outside. So like, I'll let you go before I.
Maybe cold glass.
I was going to go with something like brushing his fingertips across the cold
Yeah.
glass.
I feel like put his hand on maybe more like a palm, but yeah.
Pressing his palm to the cold glass.
Hold on. Cold seeped from the glass to the man's palm. I know he hasn't put it there yet, but you can make that two actions. Rest. Because I like the cold seat.
Yeah. But instead of to the man's palm, I would probably do something like it depends on what I'm trying to convey here. I could do infusing, I could do invading, I could do biting into the man's, like, just depends on what I'm trying to do. There's all these different emotions that we could bring into play here. Stabbing into the man's palm, or whatever. There's just depends on what
Yeah.
we're trying to do. It's one of the reasons why it's hard for me to do something like this, is because we're just editing sentences.
Yeah.
When I'm writing, I'm in the scene, I'm in the moment, so I'm feeling what the character's feeling, and so therefore, since I'm feeling what the character's feeling, depending on what I'm feeling as a character is what I'm going to say happens to my hand when I touch the window. If I'm feeling fear, I might write, the man pressed his hands against the window. He shivered from the cold seeping, whatever. So
Hmm.
it just depends on what subtext that I'm playing with, what motif I'm playing with at the time, are going to be how I start choosing my verbs.
Now this, I would actually replace with internal thought. I would just straight up replace that with an internal thought.
That is one way to do this, 100%. And I love using inner monologue, so I would never be opposed to that. So the line, for those that are just listening, he was thinking about what he had to do next.
Yeah.
Um, so if we just turn inner monologue of what am I going to do next?
Yeah. So you can either do it, what am I going to do next? Or you can say, what was he going to do, and make it a rhetorical question, or however you do internal monologue, however you do that internal thought.
Or we can bring in more of the motivation. It could be, if we left it in narration, it could be something like, his life widowed down to this one cold moment in an empty room, and he saw no way forward, or something like that. I mean,
Yeah.
we can get his flowery and his.
Yeah.
It just depends on what. Again, it all depends on the context of the story. But here's the funny thing: after you finish writing that, scroll up just a little bit. All right, keep going up. Yeah. So there was 3 or 4 wases in this paragraph originally, and after our edits, there are 0. We killed every
Because
single
was
one.
is almost always weak.
It is always a red flag.
So let me read the updated paragraph in total. The man crept into the room, eyes darting around, his finger curled around the butt of his gun where it rode on his hip. The door creaked behind him, and he whipped the weapon out of the holster. He inched toward the window. Outside, the trees swayed in the light breeze. The man pressed his hand against the window. Cold seeped from the glass, biting into the man's palm. What do I do next?
Now, if I was seriously editing this, the 2 windows so close together would bother me, so I would
Yep.
rewrite it
Also,
in some way.
I don't like the fact that the door creaked, but nothing came of it. So I would
Right,
fix, like,
right,
I'd have he look at nothing, maybe
right.
see that
Yeah,
there's nothing, or whatever the case is.
yeah. When
Like,
we edited this, we were just editing to get rid of weak verbs.
yes.
So we still have a lot of problems with it, as we always do. But
But the verbs are no longer weak.
right. Reread the original.
Okay. The man went into the room and looked around. He took a step forward and got his gun from his belt. The door made a noise behind him. He was scared, but he moved slowly toward the window. Outside, the wind was blowing softly, making the trees shake slightly. The man pressed his the man put his hand on the glass and felt the coldness. He was thinking about what he had to do next.
I mean, those are completely different in
Yeah.
their immersion factor, in their ability to draw the reader into the ability to make the reader feel more than just the visualness of the scene. The original way, you see everything, sure, but you don't feel anything. And again, we didn't edit it to try and make it more immersive. We didn't try to make it showier. We didn't do anything but just remove the weak verbs and put in stronger verbs. And even with that exercise of going through and just paying attention to the verbs that are being used, the piece is a million times better than it was. And it still shows the exact same thing.
Yeah. I think that one of the first exercises you should do as a writer is try to write a piece completely without ly adverbs and completely without was and were. Okay? Like, this is not how you should write your whole book, but as an exercise, it will help you dig deeper to find other verbs, to find the right verbs. So do it as an exercise a few times so that you can get into the rhythm of it.
Sometimes the door slowly closes, and
Yeah.
it's fine. But the
And
reason why
sometimes was is the right verb.
right.
Like,
Well, I mean, as a linking verb, the sky was
yeah,
blue,
yeah,
whatever. It's not that we're going to cut out every was and were. It's not that we're going to cut out every ly adverb. So, like in the case of the door slowly closing, if I want the focus to be on something else, and I just want to still show you that the door is slowly closing, but I don't want you to pay attention to the door slowly closing, then writing that in a weak way is the right way to write it, because you'll see the door slowly closing, but you're focusing on whatever it is that I want you to focus on. You're not focusing on, if I expand that and, inching its way forward, the door crept toward its,
sometimes you can write too excessively. Like, sometimes it really isn't that important and it can just have an ly adverb. It is not the end of the world.
right, exactly.
But when you're starting, when you're learning how to do this, run a macro, highlight every was, and kill them all. Like, eliminate every single last one of them. Eliminate every ly adverb. And just learn how to write with stronger verbs.
Yeah. And she said run a macro. Basically, if you're in Word, Control H to bring up the find replace. In the top box, right, was I like to put was space or space was space. You can also choose whole words only. And then in the bottom box, write the same thing. So was again, or was space, or space was space, whatever. And then go down to the formatting of it and choose highlight. And then just pick a really obnoxious, I always use fuchsia. And then just hit replace all. And it will replace all your was's with was's that are highlighted fuchsia. For ly, I do ly space and then replace with ly space, but highlighted, replace all. Yeah, you get words that aren't ly adverbs, like family ends in ly, whatever, but you should be smart enough to know that family is not an ly adverb. So, if you don't know that, then maybe you need to take a step back and learn a little bit more about grammar before we even get to this stage. But that's what we mean when we're saying, run a macro to find this stuff and replace it. Your find replace works really, really, really well to quickly show you, like, well, it's funny because last night during the writers group, somebody brought a thing, and I was in my overall comments, I was like, very, very heavily you're using the ly adverb, because he actually wrote a piece as a test piece to write it as showy as possible without telling anything. And I'm like, you use a lot of ly adverbs. He's like, no, I didn't. And I mean, it was like an 800-word piece. And somebody actually did a search for him, and he's like, there's 26. There's 26 ly adverbs in this. And he's like, what? And I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of them. And so we talk that way, so you don't notice them in your writing.
And the other thing that I want to say is, guys, please, like, check how many felts you use. Like, sometimes felt is the right word. I'm not saying it's never the right word.
So when I say is, you can use feel or felt if the character is feeling or felting something that is tactile. I felt the raised bumpy surface. Great. You cannot use it if it's an emotion or if it's a feeling or anything. I felt scared, anything like that. I felt cold. No, none of those. Like, if you're physically touching something tactilely, then you can use the word feel or felt. Everything else, it doesn't belong in prose.
I would rewrite that as well.
Oh, my rule is no feeling felt in narration, period. I
Yeah.
can write it in dialogue, oh, I
Yeah.
felt so afraid for you. I can't believe you did that to me, or,
Yeah. I
whatever.
will occasionally have felt in dialogue,
Yeah,
but I am very cautious of it in narration.
yeah. I
I think
almost
I've
never
used
use
it
it in narration.
once.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
Yeah.
But the big thing is when I'm teaching it is don't use it to feel emotions or to feel sensations, because
Yeah.
then you're just telling me that you're feeling cold or feeling frightened. Um,
Exactly.
can you describe, the bumpy surface of the lizard's skin? Sure. But, if it's not that important, I don't mind the occasional. I ran my fingers across the lizard's skin, feeling the bumpy texture. Like, whatever. I mean, if the story has nothing to do with lizard skin, then,
If
it's not
it's
that big of a
not
deal.
that important, I put it to you that you can say I ran my fingers over the bumpy lizard skin,
Yeah, 100%.
and then you just
100%.
kill the felt.
Yep, 100%. Just trying
But
to
yeah.
come up with an example as you crush my hopes and dreams.
But yeah, so I think that that pretty much covers verbs.
Yeah.
Um,
And hopefully you see how important they are. They literally are the most important word of every sentence.
they are the ones that do the work.
Yep.
And on that note, I think that is a good place to end this episode.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in. This is Marie Mullaney, your co-host on this literary adventure. Our goal is to provide you with valuable insights and discussions on writing. If you believe in our mission, please like and subscribe our podcast. Sharing our episodes with your community not only helps us grow, but also contributes to a richer, more diverse conversation about storytelling. We appreciate your support. For a deeper understanding of the topics we've discussed, head over to Just in Time Worlds on YouTube. It is a treasure trove where fantasy meets history and science. Every Tuesday, you'll find new videos that delve into the intricacies of world building, drawing from our rich real-world history. Whether you're a writer, a role player, or just a fantasy enthusiast, Just in Time Worlds offers unique insights that will enrich your perspective. Check it out and join the journey of crafting incredible worlds.
If you are ready to take your writing to the next level and work with a group of highly motivated, dedicated writers who are all working to not only improve their writing, but improve your writing, plus you get to work with me on a weekly basis, then I'll encourage you to check out writersroom.us. This is a website that I have created that I really wish I had 30 years ago. It's everything a writer needs to become a better writer. Not only do we do weekly critique sessions, both from other members as well as me, we have daily writing sessions, I do monthly classes, Q&As, we have activities, I do all sorts of learning exercises, such as I do a quarterly writing prompt contest, and just tons and tons and tons of things. So if you're ready to get serious about your writing and you want to actually finish that novel and have a chance of it being published, then I encourage you to head on over to the Writer's Room and join me there. And as a special promotion for listeners of Releasing Your Inner Dragon, I'll go one step more. If you would like to get 50% off for 3 months, reach out to me. There's a million ways you can do that. You can do it through starvingwriterstudio.com, drakeu.com, any of my social medias such as LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, X, whatever. Reach out to me, say that you would like to check out the Writer's Room for 50% off, and I will send you a link that will allow you to do just that. So hopefully you're ready to start getting serious about writing, and I'll see you in the Writer's Room. One of the shortest ones ever!